mic's working now. It's good. Thank goodness I didn't go to the bathroom right before this. Hi. We're the last panel. We'll keep you entertained right before the end of the day. We're between you and the happy hour. So what we'll start with is quick intros, and right at the end of that, Connor will give a short definition about OKRs. We're talking about defining and measuring success, specifically OKRs, so we'll talk about that today. I have a few questions for the panelists. I'm going to also ask for you in the audience to participate, so I'll reach out if someone in here is an expert on OKRs. Please jump in and share your experience as well. And if you have questions, please ask them too. If there's a question that I asked that you want to follow up on, please jump in and ask too. All right. So I'll start with me. I'll introduce myself. I'm Reza Shirazi. I'm at Procore. Procore builds software for the construction industry. Construction is one of the oldest industries in the world, but doesn't use a lot of technology. If you look at a building that's being built here downtown, they're still building it pretty much the same way as they used to for many years. So it's a very difficult industry. It's hard work. And what I love about it is to, at the end of the day, I'm helping folks that build buildings and build roads do it in a safe way and, make our lives better. So I love being there. Outside of that, I also co-organize a product meetup, the Product League. I don't see Dan in here, but he's my co-organizer. You probably saw him in one of the panels. And I also have a newsletter called Austin Voice of Product, where I interview and share stories of product leaders here in Austin. So if you want to check that out, just type in Austin Voice of Product and you should find it. I'll hand it off to Anna and she will introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Anna. I'm a senior product manager at Zello. Zello is a leading push-to-talk mobile application, and we serve frontline workers and also regular people who need instant communication. Prior to Zello, I used to work in a blockchain company and a ride-sharing application called Fasten. People who live in Austin probably familiar with this application. And before that, I lived and worked in Russia in the biggest Russian social network called OK.ru.
Great. I'm actually going to sit down. I don't like standing up.
Hey, I'm May. I'm actually currently fun employed. So the startup that I went to or previously worked at as a CPO, I owned the design and marketing and product teams. Hit the end of its runway, which happens. Previously, I was at Visa and EA, working at scale.
Connor O'Brien. I'm a product director at Indeed.com. We're hiring, so if anybody's interested in learning, helping people get jobs, come and talk to me and reach out. So just kind of starting this conversation off, I want to always lead with a definition. Oftentimes we, product managers or just tech in general, speak in jargon that not everybody knows what it means. So OKRs stands for, is an acronym for objectives and key results. The shortest way to describe that is the objective is the what, so what do you want to accomplish? And the KR is the key result, which is the kind of how, and that means how do you know when you've achieved your objective? And this is a sort of mechanism for planning, I suppose. But we can talk more about that, so yeah. With that.
Well, before we do, I want to ask a question. How many of you in the audience work in organizations that use OKRs? Well, that's pretty good. So it's more than half over here. So as we talk, if you have perspectives that you'd like to share or a question that we've asked over here that you'd like to give an answer on, please jump in. So where we'll start about is, I'm going to ask each of you to talk about your company's OKR process and how your product team sort of is part of that. Anna?
We do use OKR in our company, and we've been using OKR for a long time. Probably we started even before I joined the company. And before each quarter, our executives get together and discuss company's objectives and also try to set OKRs for each teams. So after that, as a product team, we try to discuss these specifically product OKRs and try to understand what key results we can set in order to measure our success. Like, for example, the company OKRs 1 year ago was to accelerate product-led growth, product-led revenue. And the product OKR, like objective, was to increase top of the funnel for this revenue, and the key result was to have 10 paid accounts came from these like new initiatives. So that's kind of how this looks in our company. And talking about alignment with another team, marketing at the same time was working on the acquisition funnel, optimizing acquisition funnel. Engineering team was working on providing the like architecture to support these product-led growth initiatives.
So it's like there were company level OKRs, and then your product team had some related to that, and you had other teams that were working with to also.
Yeah. So yeah, the main goal of why the company started implementing this using OKRs is to align all teams' goal to the company goal, to have these alignments across the teams.
Great.
So like before that, there was no alignment. Teams were working on the different goals and implementing what they like wanted at the same time. But finally, when we started like bigger and bigger, so we needed this alignment across all company.
Great. May.
Yeah, so at HOP, we had something very similar where all of the teams were kind of working towards different goals. And one of the first kind of OKRs we set, because we were so small, was company-wide. So really aligning every single team to this OKR helped me as the product owner to really create a clear roadmap. And each KR kind of identified projects that each organization would be working on, driving towards that goal. It was an eye-opening experience because it was the first time that this company that we kind of had that unified vision. So it was very helpful in that way.
So y'all weren't doing it, and then y'all started doing it. Mm-hmm. And was there a reason why that
we ran out? Yeah, no, it's a great question. So really the biggest issue was that we still had a really long way to go in order to create that foundation. There was a talk earlier where it was kind of saying you have to determine what you invest on for today, or if you focus on growth, or if you focus on foundations for the future. And we were kind of focusing on that foundation just to start, but came to the realization that in order to build that, we were just never going to get there with the amount of runway that we had. But having that OKR helped us determine that, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Connor, how about you?
I don't have too much to add from my other panelists. We're at Indeed using OKRs in a similar way. It helps create alignment between different teams, and also a really simple way to communicate what your team is working on at any given point. So it's exactly what y'all already said. I do want to point out that OKRs are not part of any like calibration or rating process, which I think is really important, and that they're meant to be really used as stretch goals, your KRs particularly, and we do adhere to that pretty strictly at Indeed. So in no review cycle would you hear about someone's OKRs, only their achievements that actually happened.
Interesting. So they're trying to keep a separation between the performance process and the sort of the OKR goal setting process. What's the kind of the downside? Like, what would happen if you didn't have that separation?
Because then people will start to sandbag their OKRs, and I think that, right or wrong, I think there's many philosophies on this, but I'm someone who believes if you set a very hard goal, you're gonna, even if you miss that goal, you'll probably do better than if you didn't set that hard goal in the first place. And so, you know, really it's, whether you met the goal is not important, it's how kind of far you've gone in the process. And that's what should be judged, not how good of a goal setter you are, or how accurate of a goal setter, or how much you can convince somebody that your very easy goal is a very hard goal.
So Connor, I'm going to start with you this round. This next question that I'm going to ask, sounds like, tying your goals and your performance, probably not a good thing. What other pitfalls do you see with OKRs, either implementing them or how they can be used or abused?
Okay, so I'm going to start with this, is that I do think OKRs are very valuable. I don't want to say that. I do think, though, that OKRs are a classic example of, oh, some big tech company is doing this, so we should all get on this bandwagon and do the same exact thing, even though that doesn't really work for our company. If you distill out what OKRs are basically like, hey, what if we created alignment? That's a really good idea, and OKRs do that really well. And what if we measured our success and added some quantitative results to our goals? I think that's a really wonderful and semi-novel thing, but there are many approaches to that. I know, Amazon does things a little bit differently, and I think that you need to adjust to where your organization is at, both from a perspective of size and maturity, and really figure out what works for your organization with the knowledge of your organization, not just pull something from a very different company in a very different time that they saw success with. So that would be, my pitfall is people not being critical enough of the frameworks that they employ and adjusting it for the organization that they're in, not the organization that they wish they were in, maybe.
So don't just read a book and say, hey, I'm just going to apply this thing, and not think about the context of
lack of context. Maybe that's a better way to say that.
Yeah. May, how about you?
I think on the opposite end, rather than how OKRs can have a negative effect, is how you might not set them up correctly. I think the objective part needs to be pretty aggressive, right? And one of the common things with OKRs is getting them confused with KPIs. It feels like there's a lot of overlap. But I would actually liken the O of OKR more to BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal, or big, wildly important goals. I think you use KPIs to inform that, and then you set the bar as high as you can, right? So I think that's a common pitfall within setting those goals.
So difference between OKRs and KPIs, importance of the objective being something much more stretched than just an ordinary goal.
Right, and the KRs are there to be here's how we're going to measure how close to that objective
goal
we're getting,
that you're,
right?
Right. Yeah. Anna, what about you?
I like OKRs, and I just want to remind that this framework was created 50 years ago. And it definitely has room for improvement. But I believe that any framework is better than no framework at all. So what would I improve in OKRs is that, first, OKR itself doesn't have any context of why we are doing that. So for example, the company set the objective. Talking about our example, drive product-led revenue, and why we are focusing on this. Why not sales-driven revenue? So OKR itself doesn't provide this answer. So The second is that key results is sometimes it's pretty vague and pretty high level. Again, our example to get these 10 clients, paid clients. But before, it doesn't provide any specific steps how we can do that. Because before setting this goal and finally achieve this goal, there are multiple steps. So first, what we need to do to achieve this goal, like 10 clients. So we need to maybe identify the opportunity, we need to research, we need to set metrics, we need to create documentation, implement this solution, test this solution, like A/B test, and finally roll it out. If it's a new solution or we need to improve existing solution, so OKR doesn't show us anything. And even if we need to implement new solution to finally paid customers, there is a huge journey. Like you can break it in small pieces when customer journey, when your customers start thinking, even considering discovery process of the customer, then they sign up, then they go through the process, reach activation, aha moment, and finally get paid. So this is a huge, long process, but as a key result, we have only one metric, paid customers. Yeah. And finally, when we review our OKRs, you can we check, we do this check-in every week and try to align, and you need to specify how much do you reach this goal. But how can I reach this goal if it's just a really high level goal?
Right.
So, and when finally by the end of the quarter you said, oh, I don't even want to reach this goal, it's 0, yeah?
Yes.
Because, there is no intermediate steps for that. I think this is a really big disadvantage of this specific framework. And the third one, why guys already talked about very ambitious goal. And a lot of people are afraid of setting this ambitious goal. So, and you need to communicate that, OKR is not about your performance metric, it's about your, vision, and not everybody understands that, and people are afraid of that.
They don't want to fail.
Yeah, they don't want to fail, that's exactly, and this is also setting, too ambitious goal is bad because it can demotivate people to work. Setting a very vague goal and a very light goal is also just not a good metric. So this is also some kind of pitfalls of setting OKRs.
Yeah, no, that's great. You talked about how setting a broad OKR doesn't necessarily tell you the steps to get there. I've seen the opposite problem where the OKR just becomes like a list of tasks. And it actually is not helpful. It's too prescriptive. It's too unambitious, if I would call it, and then people are just putting down things because they know they can do them and they feel that they're succeeding. So that's another pitfall where you can sort of fall to the other side of the spectrum. I'm curious to hear from the audience if there's anyone in here that uses OKRs, and there are many of you here, if you've seen other pitfalls that sort of folks need to be aware of in doing OKRs. And there's a mic available if anyone wants to jump in and share their experience. Go ahead.
Somewhat related to what y'all have been talking about, but the KR, the KR that is set doesn't actually measure the objective. I've seen that a lot. So that's one.
Yeah. Anyone else? Tulsi.
Yeah, I think this is a little bit like what you were talking about, Anna, where sometimes the OKR is so high that someone on the engineering team or on the design team is like, what? How does this even relate to me? How am I making impact on that? And one thing that we're trying to do this quarter, I don't know if it's going to work or not, I'll know in 2 months, is actually having a team level OKR for us. So we have 4 themes that ladder up to the OKR, but they're much more, I would say, tactical than this big audacious goal that sometimes especially more junior people on the team is what? I don't know how to move 99% SLA, for example. What does that mean? So that's, I think, learning. Would love to hear what other people have done.
So it's too big for them, they can't relate, and so you find a way of bringing it down to their level to feel like they are having an impact on it.
Yeah, it seems that OKR needs like the lower level, like tasks, for example.
Yeah,
To be like aligned, more specific, and understand your specific goals.
yeah, the balance.
Yeah,
Someone
I would
else.
just say that that's actually where I ran into the most problems is at the lower levels because people would do everything right on paper and I'd be like, wow, these are great OKRs. And then I'd go look at like what they were going to try to actually do that quarter from like a tactical execution standpoint. And they wouldn't at all be related to moving the kind of KRs at all. So it was like just this giant disconnect between like what the goal was, which is what I wanted to see, and it was great. But then what would actually happen, which was not aligning to their OKRs that they had set. So that was a big pitfall for us.
Cool. Was there someone else? I
I
can't
just
see.
wanted to add the context also to what you were asking. At a company I worked at, we had overall OKRs, and then each team went through and built OKRs to those OKRs, and it helped measure a lot more. To give an example of, we need X million in sales, but what's that mean for engineering and client success, et cetera, et cetera.
Got it. Yeah. Thanks, Christina. All right. So Anna, we'll start with you. What's your process for measuring and communicating success of the OKRs? And then I have a follow-up to that. Like, do you all use any tools to help with it?
Yeah, at Zella we use 15.5.
15.5?
15.5, yeah.
Okay.
Where you see the company objectives, your team objectives, your personal objectives, like which objective are you owning as a product manager, your key results, you see everything. And then every week you set like kind of list of tasks for this specific week. And you plan for the next week. And then you just mention what you did, what you're gonna do. So that's we use. But as I said, and as Connor said, the gap between KRs and these daily tasks, like weekly tasks, is so huge. It's just no alignment. It's really hard to align with like.
It seems a lot to sort of report on it weekly.
Weekly, we have daily also.
Oh my God. Like a lot.
Just
That's
every day we do some reports and planning.
Gosh, okay. All right.
Yeah, we usually have daily stand-ups in Slack. We use Slack for that.
Okay.
15.5, yeah.
And this is to try to sort of stay aligned in the OKRs that you all have.
Yeah, and in 15.5, you need to check your progress against of these KR.
Got it.
And as I said, if the KR is so ambitious,
It's hard to.
usually has to have 0, 0, 0, 0.
So that doesn't sound like the best.
Yeah.
May, how about y'all?
It's kind of an interesting question because we were talking about it a little bit in our roundtable about how I think what's really important is less about the tool that you use and more about who you're communicating to and what the adoption of whatever process you're using is company-wide. Kind of making sure that whatever metrics or expectations that have been set with whatever level, that's what's getting communicated. One thing that we tried at Hop but failed multiple times was using Asana. Asana has really great kind of tools for even making sure that you can say if things are on track, all of those, and you can connect it directly to goals, which is pretty neat. But if nobody's looking at that and nobody's using it, then
It doesn't matter.
right, it literally doesn't matter. We're doing all this kind of mechanical Turk work for no reason, right? And so I think that more important than the tool is what the people you're communicating to are using and how you're communicating your message effectively.
So how did you adapt? I mean, if Asana was there, but what were you doing to? Because that's a really good insight. Like they're not looking. I'm speaking.
Why waste everybody's time anymore, right? I think really it came down to presentations. Like slides were the most common, and then also spreadsheet.
Okay.
Like at this company in particular, I kept finding myself falling back to spreadsheets, so Sam can attest as well. Yeah.
Okay, great. Connor?
We primarily use slides, I guess, for as far as metric tracking, we more focus on we have a bi-weekly meeting with the product leads for every project, and they all report on the input metrics. So basically, what can they control that should be a leading indicator on how they'll achieve their output metrics, which are often what KRs tend to be a little bit more. And so we just pay attention to what metrics are going to influence, say, revenue. You can't really grow revenue magically. You have to figure out what's actually impacting revenue growth, whether it's like we need more people on the top of the funnel, or we need better retention, or something like that, so that we can track those numbers rather than, I guess, our output metric, which would be revenue. And so we just use like a spreadsheet that we have an internal data platform that people just take a screenshot of their query and put it into a spreadsheet. It's pretty low tech, but very effective and keeps people very honest, because everybody gets to see how well they're tracking towards their goals.
And so how often are y'all sort of communicating those? And you said is like monthly, bi-weekly?
Every different group has roughly bi-weekly sync with leadership, and that's what they'll do. But ideally, the individual product manager is looking at their input metrics frequently. I mean, I have an automated dashboard that shows me them every day.
Got it.
So.
Got it. And so,
Hopefully they're looking.
If I were to interpret input metric, it's something I, as a product manager, have the ability to control or influence, versus an output metric being sort of a lagging indicator of like, well, yeah, increase sales, but I can't increase sales because it takes a sales team or CSM or whatever else. And so if I do those input things, it will lead to sales. Is that a good way of
Yes, that's the working, yeah, so it's your, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Curious, folks in the audience want to share about sort of the process for how you communicate and measure OKRs in your organization that you'd like to share? Great. Sagar.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sagar. I work at Dell as a product manager for search on Dell.com and all of its associated websites. At Dell, we use a slightly different version of an OKR, and we don't call it an OKR. We call it an OGSM, which is objectives, goals, strategies, and measures, where we put the measure part in there, which is missing out of the OKRs. And the way we do it is, again, very informal, as Connor told, like very simple, either on a spreadsheet or a Word document or a PowerPoint, which is stored in a central tool where we can, like anyone in the organization can go and look at a specific team's OGSM document, and then we hold everybody within our teams and our organizations accountable by doing a quarterly review of the OGSM. And we have something called a growth board, where we bring all the stakeholders. Because of the size of the enterprise we have at Dell, we have to get an alignment for a particular objective across the board. So we have a growth board set up where we bring all the parties, all the senior executives, and kind of make sure that everybody's aligned towards that common goal or vision.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sagar. Anyone else want to share? There we go.
Hi, so I work under Connor, and one of the things.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, so one of the things like our team does, so he does like the whole organization, so there's like multiple products that he sort of oversees, but my specific product for our team, what we do is like all of us, we do like a Amazon sort of 2-pager, and I think what Anna was saying about like OKRs is that there really isn't like a context of why you do anything. So that document every quarter helps us really sort of in 2 pages really say like, hey, this is exactly why we're doing this, the context, like what's the problem we're ultimately trying to solve, identifying the input and output metrics, and really saying, well, what initiatives are we going to do to directly affect those, and even having some goals of like, ideally in this quarter we hit this percentage or whatever. But I think that ultimately helps us understand our why and what we're doing, and then that sort of feeds up to Connor, and then Connor sort of builds out some OKRs based on that.
That's great. Thank you. Good to hear kind of sort of the next level down. Good. Anyone else? Okay, I'll move on to the next one here. So how do you start setting your first OKRs, and how do you communicate that with your team? Anna, you want to start?
Before implementing any framework, you need to understand why do you need to implement this framework, and which problem are you going to solve. So that's a big question everybody who wants to start using OKR needs to just answer. And maybe for a small company, you don't need this OKR system. You just can align with your team without any frameworks. Like if you decide to set this framework, you definitely need to communicate to your team the reason why, kind of just inform them, and be sure that everyone understands the reason of setting. For example, we need alignment, we need to focus on the same goal, we need to focus on the company strategy. So everything about communication, as Maya already mentioned, communication is the key of setting.
And so is that, like at Zello, do you know why y'all decided to use OKRs?
Yeah, because when the company started growing and expanding, like the team's goal was misaligned, and everybody did like what they wanted to do. So finally, we understand that we need to focus on specific goal, like company strategy, and finally we came up to setting OKRs. Yeah, so we solved the problem of misalignment of the team.
Good. May?
Yeah, so I think we didn't really call it an OKR. We were using that framework, but that wasn't what we called it at the company. I feel like in an ideal world, they wouldn't be coming from me in that role, but instead coming from the team, from the product managers who know the customer and user best, who are working day to day with the cross-functional teams and helping to identify where there's drops in KPIs in order to inform, right? I would like to imagine a world where the leadership, as leadership, I'm setting the goal for where we want to drive the product or the company and whatever that vision is, but really OKRs are coming from that product team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Connor, how about you?
Sorry, what was the question?
It was how do you get started?
How do you get started with OKRs?
Yeah.
Your bosses tell you it's time to start writing OKRs.
Okay. It's a very honest answer.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
I don't know. I don't think everybody needs OKRs. I think that, as David's been along for the ride, but we've gone from about 6 people to over 150 in our organization. And, there's definitely a period where all-out anarchy is definitely the way to go, because you just have to execute to stay alive. At a certain point, as you get more people, and, you start, as you pointed out, teams start to drift apart from one another. And that's when you need some framework, whether that's OKRs or something else, to really realign. And whether that's OKR or not, I think you need to assess that for your own team, as there's many frameworks out there from many successful companies. But it's probably before you think you need it, but also after you think you need it. Like if you're starting a company, having started them, you don't need this right away, probably.
Mm-hmm. Great.
You should be aligned with your small team, but as you scale, you'll definitely need to create systems for alignment.
Yeah. curious from the audience, any of you working at a place where you recently started using OKRs and why you all started using them? Right there.
Hello. So I was a product manager for a startup, and I know we say that OKR is like for big teams and whatnot, but actually we were part of this accelerator program with Google, who's like the OKR OG, and they taught us how to use OKR. And actually there was this like big project that we kind of always put to tomorrow because it was so big we didn't even know how to start. And we decided, okay, let's do the Google Accelerator program for this project using OKR, and we did it. It was really amazing because as a startup, it's not just the product people who, worked on that OKR framework. We kind of as the product leader, we set the objectives, but when it came to the OKR, we worked with the engineers and the data scientists, and we really got alignment from everyone, and we succeeded to get this big, project that was just really the elephant in the room out, and it was amazing. So, again, every OKR is different for different companies, and I think there's a lot of flexibility, and at least for us, it worked for a smaller team.
Great. Anyone else?
Hey, my name's Joey. We are not using OKRs currently at HEB, which is where I'm at, but previously, at my last job, just a few years back, we had just recently implemented OKRs for about a year and a half right before I left. And it was really neat because how we had done it was very kind of by the books of our company objective is X, Y, or Z, or we have several different company-wide objectives and key results, and everyone should kind of ladder up into those for each of those teams. And we were specifically an agency, so each team was kind of more of an account-based type of team, looking at one different client. And it was fun because it was something like, hey, we have this objective to increase, revenue by 2 million, within the first half of the year or something. And each team was really able to take it a completely different way that they saw was best for their clients. And so I saw some clients saying hey, we believe we'll do that by having more scope of influence at these clients. So we're going to do things like educational seminars with them, things that would typically cost us money, but it turned into new contract signs and stuff like that. So we ended up surpassing that. It was something like 3 million or something for the first 2 halves. So it was really neat because we actually surpassed our objective.
That's great.
I also work at HB. No, we don't use OKRs, and I'm in a totally different department from him. But to that point, I have leaders that continually bring up wanting to use OKRs, and I probably, amongst my team members, have a little bit more of a framework from a previous work history with those. How do you help people who believe they want to work in this framework distinguish key results versus metrics versus KPIs? Because you already touched on the fact that those things are closely related, but not the same. And then when you start to get to an enterprise level, like where Joey and I are, a lot of times there are other things happening in tandem that you do not control. There are other inputs. I guess I'm asking you a question back in that I have people that want to do this, but they don't understand how to parse those layers underneath that actually talk about what it is that we're doing day to day and how we're moving those things, and then isolating them from all the initiatives happening at once. I don't know if you could give us some insight on that.
It's a great question. Thank you for asking. And please ask questions. You shouldn't be the only one. But anyone want to touch on that? Connor, looks like you're about to jump in.
Sure. So is the question, how do I
distinguish your key results versus your KPIs versus your metrics? I mean, KPIs are going to start thinking in numbers. Usually key results are more of a concept.
Yeah.
And then I understand these things, but then a lot of times when I'm presenting, if I start talking about key results, immediately when I start talking numbers, and I'm like, that's a different conversation, a different part of this conversation. But how do you kind of help them understand the different layers of what each one of those should speak to?
Yeah, and I think that this is one of my qualms with OKRs. Is just in this thing, there's 3 different things. For me, when someone's we'll have $10 million as our objective, that's actually not an objective, that's a key result. And so your key result is how you know you're meeting your objective, whatever your objective is. And say your key result is revenue, you're also going to have sub-layers below that of what I would call KPIs or metrics that are going to drive that key result. And you're giving your team the freedom to figure out how they want to drive that metric. I don't know if that answers your questions, but there's going to be layers and layers and layers. And that's where I think that the simplicity of OKRs are both awesome, especially in a large organization. But when you go down to kind of the individual team level, they start to break down a little bit because of that lack of specificity.
So, I mean, you're validating what I feel like I've run into, and that makes me feel better. You know, but to that point, that is something I feel like we have a hard time designating, is like at that individual team level, to like Anna's point, like I know how to drive an NPS score this way using these things, you know, or like I think I drive an NPS score. But like there are certain things I 100% know how I control, and that's the conversation a lot of times my leaders really want to have at team level. But not that we can get back up to, well, hey, we didn't meet these numbers, but it still contributes to your key results as an overarching organization in these ways. It maybe didn't hit this number, but it still has value in this other way. And how does that fit and speak to the value of other projects that may be adjacent, and also inform the same metrics that we're looking at, you know?
Yeah.
So, at least I feel good that that's not a good conversation.
I have an idea. So I'm going to tell a little bit of a story. I started out in engineering, and I was at a bar. I drank alcohol, I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. But me and one of my friends, we were actually using this thing called a makey board, which it teaches kids how electricity works, and you can turn bananas and apples into a piano. And we were talking about conductivity. Our biggest question of the day was, is a taco conductive or not? It's a really important question to answer. I still don't know. Our guess was no, because there's air in the crust. Anyway, we were talking, and there was somebody sitting at the table, and we were explaining the way a makey board works. And you touch a piece of foil, and then you touch the fruit, and that creates the circuit that the electricity, like you are the circuit. And this person was having a really hard time understanding why you needed to touch the foil. And we kept saying, well, because you're the ground. And if you know about like electricity, you need some sort of ground in order to create that current, right? And so, but instead of hearing what his question actually was, we kept saying, no, you're the ground, but you don't get it, you're the ground. And I think one of the things that we get caught up in when we're talking about how things work and trying to communicate to other teams is our own jargon. And so to your question, I think one of the things that can help is talking about it in terms of the question you're trying to answer with the O, the KR, the KPI, the metric for the overarching project. And instead of talking in terms of objectives and KRs, redirect to what are the larger questions that you're trying to answer within that project, or as a product manager, whatever those things are driving towards. And then it changes the conversation, and also I think could help from spiraling out into specifics around those numbers that people get caught up in when you're thinking about key results, because then they're like, well, numbers and money and whatever, and then right? But I think thinking in terms of that question might help.
That's really good. That's a great story too.
Yeah.
How did you explain it to them? Like that you kept saying
You're the ground. I think after we were done yelling for a while, we finally understood, like we looked at each other and we're like, oh, he's asking a different question. And then we explained how electricity works.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I love that. Love that story. Other questions from the audience? Yeah, go ahead, Tyler.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tyler. I work at WP Engine. I just wanted to give some context on how we kind of use OKRs and then have a question. Our company encourages us to have stretch goals to where each quarter we have our OKR, and then the explicit thought is that you are achieving at least 70% of the OKR that you set out. That kind of defines success, so that if you're getting 100%, you probably didn't set your goals high enough. But that gives the context of the next quarter. When you kind of talk about the next OKRs that you're going to do, you have to provide context on where you landed on the previous one. And I think that it kind of centers around like the culture of no one's going to get fired if the team doesn't get like to the OKR. And so I guess my question is, how much does the culture, the leadership, impact the team's ability or the team's aptitude for wanting to actually put a stretch goal and not one that could be fit? Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah, maybe I start. Yeah, that's probably the big difference between KPI and OKRs. KPI is your performance metric, and you can probably achieve that as much as you can. Otherwise, you can be fired or lose your benefits, yeah, and bonuses. So talking about OKRs, it might be achieved by 50%, 70%, might not be achieved at all. So it's just like a super flexible. So like definitely have to, that's why we negotiate after we have any team objectives and key results. We sit together with product team and negotiate what might be the like just relevant, like normal KPI, key results, sorry. So not too like too big, too ambitious that we are not be able to achieve, or not be super like shallow. And just, yeah, during the conversation. And any product manager own this objective, key results. It's kind of like internal thing to try to achieve as much as you can.
Yeah. And it sounds like you're creating a space to allow for creating those stretch type of goals.
Yeah, and you kind of accept the fact that you can fail. Yeah. And this is okay.
Yeah.
In OKR, this is okay.
Yeah. Any of you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short and sweet is like if you're tying your OKRs to career development, you're doing OKRs like fundamentally wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay. Other questions, or we have someone in the audience there?
Hey everyone, appreciate the conversation. Something Connor said clarified something I was been thinking about, sort of like lead metrics versus lag metrics and how that relates to OKRs. And I've only kind of read about the framework. We haven't implemented it yet, but I mean, it makes sense to me that the key results will tend to be lag metrics. But I'm wondering, like, to what extent do you surface and socialize the lead metrics that are associated with those to stakeholders specifically? Because like on the one hand, like it's a lot of information, like some of it's maybe more like useful in an internal facing capacity, but you could have like a good or a great process that leads to a bad outcome as defined against the OKR for a variety of reasons. Maybe the OKR was incorrectly defined, or maybe the hypothesis about what was going to drive the key result turned out to actually be inaccurate. And so even though it's separated from performance reviews, I think there's just an inevitable kind of human nature aspect of it, is like, A, you kind of want to show progress in some way, and that's like one layer down into like the lead metrics, but then B, you kind of want to be able to like diagnose what happened and then kind of like surface your assumptions about how lead metrics might relate to OKRs. So like, how do you kind of manage that?
So lead or what we call them input metrics are going to be kind of very much discussed in the quarterly planning process on if that really is if the set that you're kind of proposing is the correct set that will lead to the output metric that we want to have happen. And I think the next part of your question is that, you know, depending on what level in a large organization you're at is going to be what you're kind of judged on in a way. And so like if individual team kind of, you know, really nails their input metrics and we all agreed that they were the right input metrics, but it didn't lead to the result that we have, I would still say that that team did a really good job, but I did a really bad job, so that I would be responsible for the output metric, whereas the team would be responsible for the input metric. Is just, I guess, my philosophy on that.
That's great.
I think like leadership is really important when you're like developing OKRs. What I've noticed is working with other people who have to like define OKRs is, I don't know if it's the self-preservation of man, but like people love to sandbag their OKRs, and it's really up to management to challenge you to make sure that you're actually putting a stretch goal. Because even though we say like OKRs aren't tied to career performance, for some reason people still believe that like they are, even though they say they aren't. And I've had managers that say, you know, we want to have ones that are at least achievable, but then that also means please hit your OKRs because I want to look good. And then you have other managers that are like, if you're hitting your OKRs, that means that you're failing at planning your OKRs. So I feel like from the top level down, it really helps. Like for us, we have OKRs from the SLT level, and seeing how ambitious those are kind of helps you understand like, oh, okay, even our SLT isn't meeting their OKRs year over year, so it makes you feel like, oh, okay, like maybe like, or as an organization and culturally, like stretch goals are good, but I think as like, you know, having a manager, making sure that they're watching out for those for you is good because people just lead by example.
That's right. Jacqueline.
You talked a bit about how often we review the metrics, and it varies, but I'm curious if you have a regular cadence and how often you are setting the OKRs, meaning if they're like a quarterly or monthly, and then if you're nimble in terms of adjusting them. And a little bit like the question behind the question is, we are setting our goals for the year coming up soon, and last year and this year, I think perhaps in light of pandemic or just to alleviate the pressure, we're told we can change the goals and they can evolve throughout the year. But I'd say like the downside is that then to me, I'm like, well, should I put that much effort into it? Because I could change them again, or like they could revisit them again. So
Interesting question.
Chris, your take on that one.
Yeah, I bet every company changed their goal when COVID hit.
Yeah. How often do y'all do you do it annually?
Every quarter.
Every quarter.
Every quarter, yeah.
Okay.
And then revise and set like new one.
Okay.
Next quarter.
May, how about y'all?
So at the startup, we were just trying to figure out how to set goals. So that was like kind of our step one. But in previous companies, it's been an annual process where we would do fiscal planning for the year of whatever projects were coming down the pipeline. As far as like how to be inspired to set goals when given the opportunity to flex, I think it depends on the company culture a lot. If you have a company culture where you can fail fast, but fail forward, then I think that gives you more incentive to show, hey, I didn't meet these goals, but here's how I adjusted and here's how I met them later. And I think that's probably the more important piece if you need some inspiration.
Connor, how about y'all?
We do a large yearly kind of OKR thing, and then the teams do them on a quarterly cadence. That said, I mean, you were at Expedia. I can't imagine what it would be like at Expedia right now, so maybe changing the goals is the right thing to do, given this kind of crazy world we're in. So I'm not a big proponent of changing the goals unless like the external environment like radically changes. And in your case, that happened and could happen again. But just like when you're like, this may be good or bad, but to me, like when I know that we're just failing at something actually like gives me more drive to try to do that better. But that's going to be on a team-by-team basis. You don't want a demoralized team because they're doing something that they know is just not going to happen in any reality. So,
yeah. At Procore, we have company OKRs set once a year, and they stay very stable. And then product teams, I don't know about other teams, but I know that product teams set it once a quarter. And so you get a little bit more ability to adjust quarter by quarter, sort of what to focus on. Yeah. I want to ask one last question. We didn't talk about this when we had our call, but I'm curious to hear, sort of a real world, like what's the one OKR that, really worked well and an OKR disaster from your experience? And we'll ask the audience too. Curious to hear what went well and what didn't on an OKR. You're laughing. I'll let you go first.
That's a hard question, yeah.
Which one?
Can I pass? Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, I think you'll all know my answer is the company shut down.
Yeah.
It led to
the disaster.
End of the road, right? But I think in spite of that, right, there are a couple of things and a couple of reasons why that decision was made. One is really the ultimate goal of any company is to get money back to the investors, right? Like if we're being real honest, like that's why we're there, that's why we're driving towards it. And the OKR that we did set at least created alignment and the ability to create a vision where we could see that the end of the road was actually way closer than we thought. And I think instead of falling off of a cliff, we were able to hit the brakes.
Interesting.
So that I think is maybe a severe good and bad version, but yeah.
Interesting.
I'll give an example from an Indeed-wide thing. So one thing is that OKRs take a long time to adjust to, and I don't think that's recognized enough. And so last year, Indeed had this focus on becoming an interview platform. So you interview on Indeed, and they set this huge goal of a very large number of interviews, and they've only achieved about 15% towards the goal. And so everybody, I heard all sorts of conversations about like, oh, we failed, this was so stupid, everything is dumb. But that 15% actually made Indeed the largest by about a margin of 2 than the second biggest player in that space previously. And so that mentality and the rush into OKRs, we'll see what happens over the next couple of years, but I think that's maybe the biggest success or maybe the biggest failure of OKRs right there is that you're almost always going to miss your goal and that you can still do amazing things, but that can play with people's impressions of what success looks like.
Interesting. That's a good one. Anyone in the audience want to share? Success and or failure. Okay. Any last questions? Okay.
How do you feel about overall just abandoning a KR or an OKR? Just like you realize like midway through, this is either the wrong direction, we shouldn't have gone in this direction at all, or you know for a fact in the next year, you're not gonna do anything here. Like, what do you feel about abandoning them?
Do we have something to talk about in our next
No. Not yet.
Maybe. It's what I want to ask my boss, actually. I feel that way about one of my KRs. I've had my one-on-one tomorrow. It's on my list to talk about. Honestly, I'm like, I don't know about this one. We're halfway through the quarter. I haven't done anything.
You set the KR.
Hypothetical question.
Like I said, I don't feel good about it. You can, you know, you do it again in the next quarter, you missed it. And in 11 weeks, you'll get to do it all over again and not set that same KR. And from a leadership perspective, you know, hopefully you have, you know, without major external changes to the macro environment, hopefully you've put enough thought into your kind of OKRs that they're at least, you know, your strategy is at least sound for 12 months before you need to reevaluate.
Anyone else? Great, well, thanks everyone. Oh, there's one more.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been wondering is kind of there are some projects that seem that are very important for kind of our core product, but they may not be fully translatable into these KRs or into like these goals. And so do you guys, from your experience, do you have something like that, that you have some products or some, not products, some projects that you know are important and they have some sort of opportunity, but they may not fully translate, for instance, into revenue, which is, I mean, usually the main thing.
Yeah, I have an example. So, you know, our company is setting objectives for sort of new areas of construction to go into, and those are ones where, you know, they have OKRs on, and other mature parts of the product don't really fit into that. And so, you know, we don't set goals for them as much, but they're still important. They still make money for the business. I don't have a good answer because I feel it's kind of like there's this disconnect of like, you know, what do we want to do with those and why aren't they? But a company has to have a certain focus. Like they know that these things will lead to the growth that we need versus this thing is mature and probably won't give us the same type of lift that we want. So that's my assumption about why they aren't included. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's kind of, yeah, my experience.
You might need a difficult conversation. Like, should this exist? If it's not part of your company's objectives, like maybe those resources should be deployed in a way that they are leading to movement in those objectives. And, you know, I think you can really probably speak to that the best in your recent experience, but I think that's one of the really nice things about OKRs in some ways.
Yeah. Great. All right.
Let's give it up for our panel.
Thank you.